A black father walks into a school meeting, proud of his daughter's straight-A record, only to hear the principal accuse her of cheating, because kids like her don't usually score that high. The room goes silent, eyes burning into him, waiting for him to break. But instead of arguing, he slides a folder onto the table, and the contents make the entire board gasp. What he revealed that night would tear the whole town apart. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The bell above the door gave a tired little jingle, as Harold Whitfield stepped into Millie's place. The diner smelled of grease and brewed coffee, the kind of smell that clung to a town the way old wallpaper clung to a wall, faded, but permanent. It was late afternoon, the hour when the lunch rush had dissolved, and the dinner crowd had yet to form. Booths stood half empty, the neon open sign humming in the window. Harold took a slow breath as he slid into a booth near the back, adjusting the brim of his weathered cap. It bore the patch of his old unit, faded from sun, frayed from years. Most people didn't even notice. When they did, they rarely asked. He didn't mind. For Harold, silence had become part of survival. The waitress came quickly, pen in hand. She was young but carried herself with the kind of careless confidence that came from being rooted in the same small town your whole life. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, strands hanging loose around her smirking face. Her name tag read Sherry. Without a greeting, she set down a laminated menu, sticky from years of use. "Water?" she asked flatly, chewing her gum. "Yes, ma'am. Water's fine," Harold answered politely. His voice was deep but soft, carrying the faint rasp of years of shouting over engines and explosions overseas. Sherry disappeared without another word. Harold let his eyes wander over the diner's decor, faded posters of county fairs from decades ago, framed photographs of Little League teams, yellowed newspaper clippings of the town mayor shaking hands with visiting politicians. The booths were vinyl, some split at the seams and patched with duct tape. It was the kind of place that pretended nothing ever changed, even when everything outside its walls did. When Sherry returned, she placed the glass on the table with a careless clink. Harold's eyes dropped to it immediately. The water was cloudy, faintly tinged with something that shouldn't have been there. A smudge of lipstick, red, greasy, marked the rim. Sherry didn't move. She lingered, looking down at him with a grin too wide to be friendly. Then came the laugh, low at first, then sharper, quick, as if she had shared a joke only she understood. She turned on her heel and left without asking for his order. Harold sat still, the sound echoing louder in his mind than in the diner. He glanced around to see if anyone had noticed. The older man in the corner was buried in his newspaper. A mother struggled with two restless children by the window. The cook behind the counter slid plates across to another waitress as if this moment had never happened. His hands rested on the table, steady but heavy. He had carried rifles across deserts, crouched in dirt waiting for the crack of gunfire, and buried brothers in foreign soil. But here in the town he called home, he was being reduced to something less than a man, mocked for his skin, for his presence, for daring to exist in a space where others thought he didn't belong. He reached for the glass, not to drink but to hold it closer. The rim was chipped. A streak of grease floated along the top. His reflection wavered in the water, distorted, blurred. For a moment he saw not his face but every indignity layered across the years. The clerk who followed him through the hardware store, the officer who asked if the car he drove was really his, the neighbors who locked their doors when he walked past. The dirty water was just another reminder. His chest tightened, but he swallowed the anger. Harold was not a man who made scenes. The army had drilled restraint into him, taught him to hold fire until the order came. Yet restraint in war was survival. Restraint in peace often felt like surrender. Across the aisle he caught movement. A couple, mid-30s, dressed casual, jeans, flannel, wedding rings, sat 2 tables away. They hadn't touched their food. Their eyes shifted between Harold and the glass. The woman leaned toward her husband and whispered. Her phone tilted in her hand. The man's jaw was tight, his own phone resting on the table, screen lit. They weren't just watching. They were recording. Harold looked away quickly, not wanting to meet their eyes, but the weight of their attention pressed on him. His mind raced. Did they see what he saw? Did they hear the laugh? Or were they just hungry for a spectacle? The kind that could be packaged into a 30-second clip for strangers online. Sherry returned, not with a notebook, but leaning against the counter with 2 other waitresses. Her voice carried across the diner. Guess some folks don't know better than to complain about free water. Another laugh. This one louder. The sound stung. Harold's fingers tightened around the chipped glass until his knuckles ached. He could hear his father's voice in his head. Keep your head down, Harold. They're waiting for you to break. He thought of his daughter, now grown, who once asked why he never pushed back when people said things. He had told her the truth. Sometimes silence was the only armor left. But this silence felt heavier. It wasn't just about him anymore. He set the glass down carefully, forcing his hands steady. His eyes drifted again to the couple nearby. This time, the woman didn't look away. Her phone remained angled, her thumb tapping the screen. The husband leaned forward, his expression carved with intent. They weren't just observing, they were documenting. Harold's pulse thudded slow, but loud in his ears. For years he had lived unnoticed. That moment had ended. Something was being written, recorded, perhaps even judged beyond these diner walls. And whether he liked it or not, he was the subject. His stomach sank, but he sat upright, back straight, shoulders squared the way he had in uniform. He did not touch the glass again. He didn't call Sherry back or demand better service. Instead, he waited, still as stone, eyes fixed on a point beyond the table. The couple exchanged another glance. The woman pressed her phone closer to her lap. The man scribbled something quickly in the margin of a folded napkin. Harold felt the weight of history pressing down, not just his own but generations before him. What had started as a dirty glass of water had become something larger, though he couldn't yet see how far it would go. As Sherry tossed her ponytail and vanished through the swinging door to the kitchen, Harold finally lifted his eyes from the table. For the first time, he met the gaze of the couple across the aisle. And in that single charged second, he realized they weren't just watching, they were keeping record. Harold stays silent, but when he looks up, a white couple at the next table is watching closely, taking notes on their phones. For a long breath, Harold held the couple's gaze, then broke it first, the old habit of yielding to avoid escalation guiding his eyes down. He slid out of the booth with the slow care of a man who had learned to leave no trace. A few bills, cash he could spare, went under the sweaty glass, as if to seal the moment shut. The door's bell gave that same tired jingle when he stepped into the fading light of late afternoon. The street soft with the hush of a small town between shifts. Millie's place sat on the corner like a memory that refused to age. Harold passed its front window, and without meaning to, checked his reflection in the glass. A tall man with lines etched by sun and time, a cap with a frayed unit patch, eyes that had learned to take in more than they gave away. He kept walking. Main Street stretched ahead, lined with brick storefronts, hardware store, thrift shop, a florist that closed early on weekdays. The flag above the post office hung at half-mast for a service member. Harold didn't know. He always felt that tug, the brotherhood that didn't need names. A group of teens in varsity jackets clustered near the soda machine outside the gas station. Their laughter dipped when Harold approached, that familiar slackening that said, "We're not sure what to do with you." One boy's smile came late, performative, apologetic, and then his eyes slid to the cap and widened a notch. "Afternoon," Harold said. Easy. Not expecting a reply. The smallest nod came back. "Afternoon, sir." The boy's friend tugged his sleeve and murmured something. Harold didn't catch. He didn't stop to make it clear. The lesson of small towns was simple. Move on before they decide what you are. The rhythm of his steps steadied him. With each footfall, the diner's ridicule dissolved into the daily cadence he understood. Get home, feed the dog, check the mail, boil rice, listen to the ballgame on a radio older than his daughter. Quiet, predictable. He prized the small rituals because they kept the bigger ghosts at bay. He reached the crosswalk where he worked mornings as a substitute crossing guard when the district was short. He'd taken the job the year he came home for good. The pension covered rent. The job covered time. In the early light, with drizzle silvering the asphalt, he had learned the names of children who waved to him like a landmark. "Morning, Mr. H." They'd chirp, and his reply would be the same. Eyes up, shoes forward. Sometimes a parent would slow their car, window down, and say thank you for your service. The words drifting from mouths that rarely met his eye. He never said you're welcome. He'd say drive safe, and tip his cap. 2 blocks more, and the old church rose on his left. White paint peeling, the bell tower lopsided from decades of storms. On Thursdays he stacked folding chairs in the basement for the food pantry, marked cans with dates, and carried boxes to trunks. He didn't talk much down there either. But he listened. People confessed to the air, lost jobs, lost rent, lost patience. The pantry director, a no-nonsense woman named Lorna, would sometimes rest a hand on his arm when no one was looking. "You're all right, Harold," she'd say, as if reminding him of news he might have missed. He crossed under the bell tower now, and the door creaked open. Lorna stuck her head out, gray curls unruly around a face that could cut or cradle depending on what you needed. "You walking by without saying hello?" she called. He paused on the steps. Didn't want to interrupt. "You look busy." "Busy can wait." "You good?" Harold hesitated. The question felt too large for the sidewalk. "Fine," he said. "Long day." Lorna's eyes sharp, reading beyond answers, flicked to the cap and back to his face. "Long day is code. I've got coffee that's been sitting since noon. It'll taste like penance. Want a cup?" "Another time," he said, managing a small smile. "Thank you." She leaned an elbow against the doorframe, lowering her voice. "You know the thing about this town. It plays nice with the past, but gets real skittish about truth. You need anything, you knock. That's not charity. That's community." He nodded. "I know." He didn't add how often he'd been told about community by those who wouldn't sit next to him at the diner. Back on the sidewalk, he let the streets pull him forward. Houses changed from brick to clapboard, yards from manicured to stubborn. His own rental sat behind a pecan tree that shed more than it shaded. The porch rail needed paint. A wind chime tinkled a tired tune. He liked it for its smallness, its refusal to be anything but what it was. Inside, the dog rose from a nap with the stiff dignity of an old sergeant. Booker was a mid-size mutt with floppy ears, and the kind of loyal gaze that held steady when people didn't. "You're the only one I fully trust," Harold said, bending to scratch between Booker's ears. The dog sighed contentment and leaned his warm weight into Harold's shin. He filled Booker's bowl, set water that actually ran clear, and turned the radio on low. A game announcer murmured stats from somewhere far away, a voice smooth as a porch swing. The ordinary sounds stitched the room together. Fridge hum, clock tick, dog's soft lap at the bowl. On the kitchen table, a small stack of letters waited. The VA envelope sat on top. He had learned to open those standing up, the way one braces for weather. Today's contained an appointment reminder, and a pamphlet about group therapy he'd already tried once. He'd gone a single Tuesday, sat in a circle, and listened to men who sounded like him say things he had not yet decided belonged to him. After he walked home through the park and felt like he'd borrowed someone's shoes, he promised the counselor he'd return. He had. He folded the papers back into the envelope and slipped it under the salt shaker, like putting a lid on a pot to keep the steam in. He rinsed out the coffee mug in the sink and watched the water swirl clean. In another life, in another kitchen, he might have told the story of Afghanistan, with the candor of men recounting storms, the suddenness, the debris, the loss counted in quick sums. In this life, he measured his words like aspirin. Take only what keeps you upright. By the window, his daughter's photograph stood propped in a frame she'd sent for his last birthday. She wore a lab coat, her smile a bright inherited thing from a mother long gone. "Working nights, Dad. Don't worry if I miss your calls." He didn't worry so much as wait. When she did call, he told her about Booker and the children at the crosswalk and the tomatoes that refused to ripen. He never added the cashier who double-counted his 20. He never mentioned the way a woman clutched her purse closer when he stepped into an elevator. She had her own battles. He refused to add pebbles to her pockets. He made rice and beans, in a pot too big for one man, because some habits are stubborn. The rhythm of the spoon against the pot steadied him again, and he thought he could file the diner away under things that stung but didn't kill. Almost. Then the glass rose in his mind, cloudy, chipped, marked by someone else's mouth, and the laugh. The laugh traveled. Booker thumped his tail once and then stiffened, head tilted toward the window. Tires hissed against the curb. Harold peered through the curtain. The couple from the diner drove past in a dark sedan, the woman in the passenger seat on her phone, face lit by the glow. The car didn't slow, but the timing sliced through him. He hadn't imagined their attention. They hadn't let it go. He ate, washed the pot, wiped down the counter, and laid out tomorrow's jacket on the chair, ritual as armor. But the edges of the day wouldn't smooth. He needed air. He snapped Booker's leash to the collar and stepped back outside. Dusk had thickened. Porch lights blinked on up and down the block. Across the street, Mr. Kavanaugh wrestled with a stubborn sprinkler head, muttering as if the plastic respected complaints. Further down, Kids chalked a hopscotch grid on the sidewalk, their laughter unpracticed and good. It was the kind of evening that tried to convince you that nothing heavy could happen here. They walked the block slow, Booker choosing the route with that dog logic that looks like whim and is actually memory. Harold nodded at the neighbors he knew by habit. If not by heart, he had learned that intimacy in small towns was a currency distributed along invisible lines. That some doors opened from inside only. Near the corner, the florist flipped her sign from open to closed, and saw him through the glass. She held a hand up in a wave that was mostly polite, then pushed the door and stepped out. "Mr. Whitfield," she said. "How are you tonight? Taking a walk before the game gets interesting," he said. She smiled, then faltered, eyes flicking to the cabin away. "Well, nice evening for it." They traded nods, and moved on. It didn't hurt. Exactly. It landed like a small stone in a pocket already heavy with them. At the end of the block, the pecan tree outside his house dropped a nut with a sharp clack against the sidewalk. Booker jumped. Harold chuckled, a brief unwinding. When he looked up, his neighbor, a quiet woman who kept to herself, was standing at her gate. Her name was Dana. She taught art at the middle school, drove a hatchback with bumper stickers for local charities, and spoke as if every sentence counted. "Harold," she said softly. "You got a minute?" "Sure," he said. Booker sat at his heel out of old training. Dana leaned in, voice down to a thread. "I heard what happened at the diner," she whispered. "And people are already talking online." Harold's mouth went dry. "Talking how?" Dana glanced over her shoulder, then back to him, pupils wide with urgency. "The video. It's spreading. But that's not all. Look at this." She lifted her phone. On the screen, a post glowed. The couple's shaky clip, the dirty glass, Sherry's laugh, but the caption wasn't by a stranger, it was by Millie's Place itself. The diner had shared the video first, calling Harold a chronic complainer, and claiming they offered him bottled water he refused. Harold stared, the ground tipping a degree under his feet, as the lie unfurled in public. Before he could speak, Dana's phone lit again, comments stacking, notifications hammering, and then a new alert slid across the top. Health Department tagged Millie's Place in a comment. Dana's eyes snapped up to his. "They're seeing it too," she swallowed. "Harold. This just got bigger." Dana's phone trembled faintly in her hand as Harold stared at the screen. The glow lit both their faces in the darkening street. Sherry's laugh echoed again through the clip, distorted but unmistakable, paired with a caption that turned truth into performance. Chronic complainer refused bottled water. The lie was bold, daring the town to pick a side. "Why would they post this themselves?" Harold asked quietly, as if speaking too loud might make it worse. Dana shook her head. "To get ahead of the story. To make it look like you're the problem." Her tone held both disgust and resignation, like someone who had seen this playbook before. Booker shifted uneasily, ears pricked, sensing his owner's tightness. Harold swallowed the sting and forced steadiness into his voice. "Let's hope folks see it for what it is." But hope was fragile in towns like theirs, where narratives bent depending on who spoke first. By the next morning, Harold's name was being whispered in barbershops and grocery aisles, murmured behind coffee cups in the town square. Facebook groups lit up with commentary. "I've eaten at Millie's Place for years. Never had an issue. People just look for reasons to complain. Funny how this so-called veteran didn't have a problem until now. Some folks always want attention. Maybe if he acted respectful, he'd be treated respectful." Every few posts someone countered, "I've seen Sherry act this way before. He's not lying. The glass was clearly dirty. Y'all just don't want to admit the truth because of who it happened to." This isn't the first time Millie's Place has treated black customers differently. But those voices were fewer, drowned out by the flood of defensive loyalty to the diner. Millie's Place wasn't just a restaurant. It was a piece of the town's identity, a gathering point where Friday nights ended and Saturday mornings began. For some, protecting it felt like protecting themselves. At the hardware store, where Harold sometimes bought nails for small repairs, the clerk greeted him with a smile too wide, too rehearsed. "Saw your name on the internet, Mr. Whitfield," the clerk said, tone stretched between curiosity and caution. "You know how folks blow things up out of proportion." Harold's reply was steady. "Sometimes folks just tell the truth." The man chuckled nervously, shifting his weight. "Yeah, well, the internet doesn't care about truth. It cares about clicks." Harold walked out with his nails, but the words clung to him. By late afternoon, the whispers sharpened. Teenagers scrolled through their feeds, laughing loud enough for Harold to hear as he crossed the street. "That's the guy," one muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. At the church pantry, a volunteer asked, "You sure you want to be here with all that noise online?" Lorna snapped back before Harold could answer. Why wouldn't he be? Truth doesn't stop boxes from needing to be lifted. Still, Harold felt the shift, the glances, the pauses in conversation when he entered a room, the subtle withdrawal of people who once exchanged pleasantries. Not outright hostility, not yet, just distance. That evening, Dana knocked on his door, holding out her phone again. "You need to see this." A new post had surfaced in a local community group. If he was really a veteran, where's the proof? Anybody can wear a hat. Dozens of comments followed, some demanding his service record, others outright denying he ever served. Harold exhaled slowly, jaw tightening. So now my word's not enough. Dana's expression was gentle but firm. "They're trying to erase you before the truth sticks. That's how it works. They'll discredit you until people forget why they're mad in the first place." He nodded, but a flicker of something sharper burned beneath his calm. He had carried papers in a folder at the back of his closet, discharge records, commendations, even a medal, proof of service, proof of sacrifice, proof of survival. Yet here he was, forced to consider showing it like a man proving his existence to strangers. As night deepened, the tension thickened too. Online, the argument stretched beyond the town. The video, once confined to a handful of shares, leapt into wider feeds. Comments no longer carried just local names, but strangers from different states. "This is disgusting. A man who fought for his country mocked like that? Typical. Y'all only care when it's on camera. The waitress should be fired immediately." But for every voice of outrage, another sneered. "This is race baiting. Plain and simple. Maybe the glass was dirty. Big deal. You think waitresses don't have a hard enough job already? Y'all are ruining a business over nothing." The diner's official page doubled down, posting a picture of Sherry smiling with longtime regulars. The caption read, "Our staff is family. We stand by them." That post alone drew hundreds of shares, half in support, half in fury. Inside his house, Harold sat at the kitchen table, the glow of his daughter's framed photo watching him as if waiting for an answer he couldn't yet form. Booker lay curled at his feet, tail thumping softly when Harold shifted. He thought of silence again, the armor that had carried him this far. But silence here didn't protect him. It painted him guilty in the court of public opinion. A knock rattled the door. Lorna stood on the porch, breathless, holding a folded printout from her computer. "I printed this before it disappears," she said, handing it over. It was another post, not from Millie's place but from an anonymous account. "Funny how Harold Whitfield always seems to be around when there's trouble. Folks should ask why he left the army in the first place." Beneath, a comment thread speculated wildly: disciplinary action, dishonorable discharge, secret scandals, lies breeding lies, fed by those who had never met him. Harold's throat tightened. He looked up at Lorna, whose eyes shone with fury. "You saved lives," she said fiercely. "And they're trying to strip you of it with a keyboard." He folded the paper carefully, as if it were fragile. "They'll say whatever makes them comfortable." Lorna shook her head. "No, Harold. They'll say whatever keeps you small." That night, he sat by the window long after the street fell quiet. He thought of the desert nights overseas, when silence meant waiting for something unseen. This silence was different, crowded, humming with voices that weren't in the room but pressed in from everywhere. Near midnight, Dana messaged him again. "Harold, it's gone beyond local groups. It's trending now. Thousands of comments. You need to brace yourself." Harold looked at the screen, the words blurring as exhaustion pulled at him. He whispered to himself, a truth and a question all at once. "What did I ever do but sit down for a glass of water?" Booker stirred at his feet. The clock ticked toward morning, and then Harold's phone buzzed again. Louder this time, an alert flashing across the screen. The post about him and Sherry hadn't just spread. Overnight, it had exploded. Thousands of angry comments were pouring in, turning Harold's humiliation at Millie's place into a firestorm that was no longer just his to carry. By dawn, the storm was no longer just online. It was pressing against the diner's doors. Millie's place had always been more than a restaurant. It was a ritual, woven into the lives of families who'd grown up sliding into its booths. On Friday nights after football games, Teens piled in for fries and milkshakes. On Sunday mornings, pastors and deacons shook hands over plates of biscuits and gravy. Retirees claimed the same counter stools each morning like clockwork, their laughter ringing through the air long before the coffee did. For 40 years, Millie's place wasn't just in the town, it was the town. The building itself carried history in its bones. The walls, once painted bright white, now held a yellow tint that no scrub brush could fix. Old black and white photos of the original owner, Millie herself, smiled from frames above the booths. Millie had been known for generosity. She'd fed families who couldn't pay, slipped food into paper bags for hungry children, and kept the diner open on snow days when everything else in town closed. But Millie was gone now, 10 years buried, and what remained was her name, kept alive more by nostalgia than by the values she had lived. Behind the counters, and under the buzz of the neon sign, a different legacy had taken root. Regulars knew, even if they didn't say it out loud, that not everyone got the same service. White customers often received smiles, easy chatter, the "how's your mama doing" warm. Black customers, Latino families, even newcomers from the city who looked different, were often met with flat tones, slower service, or the kind of jokes that landed sharp, instead of lighthearted. Most brushed it off, others simply stopped coming, and those who complained rarely returned. It was a truth tucked neatly beneath the town's surface, the kind of discrimination not written in rules but practiced in habits, shrugged off as just the way things are. Now, with Harold's video rippling through the internet, that quiet tolerance was cracking open for the world to see. By mid-morning, the booths were filled not with laughter, but with tension. Customers whispered, as they scrolled through their phones. The older men at the counter shook their heads at the news, muttering that things were being blown out of proportion. A young mother at a corner table asked the waitress if the glass in the video really came from this diner. The waitress didn't answer. Sherry, the woman at the center of it all, strutted in late for her shift, sunglasses perched on her head like she was arriving at a beach party instead of a scandal. Her coworkers, two other waitresses, both older, paused when she walked in, their expressions torn between curiosity and disapproval. "Girl," one of them said, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the edge, "you see what's happening online?" Sherry rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. That man was looking for something to cry about. Y'all act like I spit in his food. It was just a glass of water." The other waitress leaned in. "Sherry, your laugh was caught on camera. People aren't taking it the way you think." "So what?" Sherry said, tossing her order pad on the counter. "Everybody's so sensitive these days. I'm not apologizing for a joke. Folks need to toughen up." Her dismissal carried through the room, though she didn't notice the stares that lingered longer than usual. In the kitchen, the cook muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he flipped bacon. He had worked at Millie's place for 20 years, seen the town change and refused to change at the same time. "This ain't gonna blow over," he whispered to himself. But Sherry thought otherwise. By lunchtime, she was laughing with a group of regulars who tried to reassure her that the internet was just noise. They told her Harold was playing the race card, that people couldn't take a joke anymore. Each word fed her confidence, puffing her chest higher, her smirk sharper. "See?" she said to her coworkers later. "Half the town's on my side. He'll be yesterday's news by tomorrow." Yet outside those walls, tomorrow was already shifting. In homes across town, phones buzzed with the latest reposts. The video had been shared by a state-level news blog, then picked up by an activist page with hundreds of thousands of followers. The caption was blunt: "Black veteran mocked, in small-town diner while waitress laughs." The clip now carried hashtags that stretched far beyond the town's borders. "In racism exposed. Veterans deserve respect. Millie's place." By the afternoon, strangers from other states were commenting, some tagging television reporters, others demanding the waitress be fired, the diner boycotted. The story was no longer just about a dirty glass of water. It was about what it represented. Inside the diner, Sherry's phone buzzed constantly in her apron pocket. She finally pulled it out during a lull, and froze when she saw her own face staring back at her screenshot from the video. Her smirk paused in cruel permanence. Thousands of people had shared her image with captions she couldn't control. Words like racist, shameful, coward. Her throat tightened, but she quickly masked it with another laugh. "They've got nothing better to do," she told her coworkers. "People get mad online, then they move on." But she kept checking her phone, the notifications piling faster than she could read them. For every local voice defending her, 10 strangers called her out. Her name, once just a tag on her uniform, was now circulating through comment sections she couldn't contain. When she stepped out to serve a table of travelers who had stopped for pie, one of them stared at her, then whispered to his wife. The wife held her phone low, clearly comparing Sherry's face to the viral screenshot. Sherry's cheeks flushed, but she forced a grin and pretended not to notice. Back at the counter, her co-workers exchanged glances. One leaned close to the other and murmured, "This isn't going away, is it?" "No," the other replied grimly. "It's just starting." Sherry pretended not to hear. She leaned against the counter, twirling her pen, forcing her laughter to sound natural. But when her phone buzzed again, her hand trembled slightly as she pulled it free. The notification was different this time. Not a stranger's comment, not a share. It was a direct message from someone she hadn't spoken to in years. The message read, "Sherry, it's on the news. Call me before it gets worse." She blinked, pulse quickening. News. Already? She hurried into the kitchen to check for herself, fumbling with the remote that controlled the small TV mounted above the cook station. The cook grunted as she flipped through channels, until she found it. A local news anchor, sober expression, speaking over the very clip she had laughed off just hours earlier. The waitress, identified as Sherry Lawson, is now at the center of a viral controversy. Her smirk faltered, draining into something smaller. She turned back toward the kitchen door and caught the cook watching her, spatula frozen in his hand.
"You didn't think this was going to reach outside the town?" he said quietly.
Sherry swallowed, but words failed. The laugh she had leaned on like armor no longer came. Because now her name and face weren't just floating around Facebook groups. They were on television, attached to headlines she couldn't rewrite. Sherry laughed it off to her coworkers, until she discovered her name and face had gone viral, flashing across the evening news for the entire country to see. The tiny TV above the cook station kept replaying the clip, Sherry's hand setting down the dirty glass, the smirk frozen on her face, the laugh that lingered even when the sound cut out. The image looped again and again. Indifferent to her panic, each repetition carved deeper into her chest, until she slammed the remote on the counter. "This is ridiculous," Sherry muttered, voice louder than she meant. "It's just a glass of water. People are acting like I burned the place down." Her coworkers exchanged glances, but stayed quiet. The cook turned back to his griddle, flipping bacon with a deliberate calm. Sherry shoved her phone back into her apron and stormed out to the dining floor, forcing her stride to carry a confidence she didn't feel. A couple of regulars waved her over. "Don't let him get to you, sweetheart," one man said, a contractor whose company logo was stitched on his jacket. "We know you didn't mean anything. Folks blow things up online because they've got nothing better to do." "Exactly," Sherry said, her relief spilling too quickly. "It was a joke, that's all. People are so sensitive." But even as she said it, she caught sight of a woman at another booth glaring at her. The woman, unfamiliar, whispered something to her husband, who immediately raised his phone and started typing. Sherry's chest tightened. That evening, she sat in the back office of the diner with her manager, Carl, a balding man in his 50s who had run Millie's place since Millie's passing. The blinds were half shut, and the office smelled faintly of coffee and fryer oil. "Carl, I swear I didn't mean anything by it," Sherry said, pacing the small room. "I was just joking." He looked so serious sitting there, and I thought maybe I could lighten the mood. Carl rubbed his temples, weary. "Sherry, you laughed at a man you handed a dirty glass to. A black veteran. On camera. You didn't lighten anything. You made it worse." Sherry stopped pacing, her face flushing red. "So now I'm a racist because of one laugh? I've worked here for years. I know half the town. If I hated black people, wouldn't somebody have said something by now?" Carl hesitated. His silence said more than words. "What?" Sherry demanded. He sighed. "People have said things, Sherry. They just never stuck. You remember the Wilsons. Complained you rolled your eyes when they asked for fresh silverware. The Jeffersons? Said you gave them the wrong order twice and didn't apologize. And don't tell me you don't remember the college kids last summer." Sherry's face hardened. "That was different. They were rude to me first." "Sherry," Carl said firmly, "everybody who complains can't be wrong." The words hit like a slap, but she pushed them away. "They're exaggerating. People always take his side because it makes them feel righteous." Carl leaned forward. "No. They're taking the truth's side. And now it's not just the town watching. It's the whole country. Sherry's defense cracked slightly, her voice slipping lower. So what am I supposed to do? Get on TV and cry? Say I'm sorry for something I didn't mean?
Yes, Carl snapped. Because if you don't, this place goes under. And we both know it.
That night, Millie's Place issued an official statement on their Facebook page, written hastily by Carl, but influenced by Sherry's insistence. Our staff strives to serve all customers with dignity and respect. The recent video has been taken out of context. Sherry did not intend to offend, and regrets how her actions were perceived. The word perceived set off another firestorm. Comments poured in within minutes. Perceived? We all saw it happen. Stop gaslighting. So she's not sorry for what she did. Just sorry people noticed. This statement is worse than the video. And then came the screenshots. Locals began posting old texts, messages, and anecdotes. One woman uploaded a photo from last year, a receipt with "smile more" scribbled in pen under the total. She wrote, "Guess who my waitress was? Sherry." Another former customer claimed that when she came in with her black husband, Sherry forgot to bring their drinks 3 times. The picture forming wasn't just of one bad moment. It was of a pattern. By morning, hashtags weren't just targeting Millie's Place. They were naming Sherry Lawson directly. Strangers dug through her old public posts. Comments she thought harmless jokes were suddenly being reposted, with captions that painted them in a different light. Sherry scrolled through them at her kitchen table, hands shaking as her coffee went cold. Her mother called, voice sharp with worry. "Baby, you need to get off the internet. This isn't something you can joke away." "I'm not apologizing," Sherry said, voice brittle. "If I say sorry, it's like admitting I'm some kind of monster." Her mother sighed heavily. "You're not a monster, but you are stubborn, and stubborn doesn't win against the whole world." Sherry ended the call, heart pounding. For the first time, doubt whispered in her ear. What if Carl was right? What if this didn't fade? By noon, news trucks rolled into town. Reporters stood outside Millie's Place, with microphones, narrating into cameras as curious locals gathered in clusters nearby. The diner's name glowed on national broadcasts, no longer just a neon sign, but a headline, "Small Town Diner, at Center of Racism, Controversy." Carl stood in the doorway, sweat beading at his temple as he tried to wave reporters away. "No comment," he repeated again and again, his voice cracking. Inside, Sherry peeked through the blinds, her stomach twisting. She turned to her coworkers, forcing a shaky laugh. "See? All this for a glass of water. It's insane." But no one laughed with her. Then the phone behind the counter rang, shrill and insistent. One of the older waitresses answered, listened, and her eyes widened. She covered the receiver and whispered to Carl, "You better take this." Carl grabbed the phone, his face paled as he listened. "You're kidding," he muttered. "Tomorrow? Here?" Sherry's stomach dropped. "What is it?" Carl hung up, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Sherry, then at the rest of the staff. "That was a heads up. Civil rights activists are coming. Tomorrow morning, they're marching straight to Millie's Place." The words landed heavy, like a door slamming shut. For the first time, Sherry couldn't summon her laugh. The diner's manager panicked after the call, because civil rights activists had just announced they were arriving the next morning. The news of the activist march spread faster than the breakfast orders leaving Millie's Place. By nightfall, the entire town was humming with it. Barbershops, church basements, grocery aisles, and front porches alike. It wasn't just about a dirty glass of water anymore. It had become a litmus test for where people stood. At the diner, Carl locked the doors early, muttering that he needed time to think. Sherry left with her chin lifted high but her shoulders tight, sunglasses hiding the fear in her eyes. Some locals gathered on the sidewalk as she hurried past, a few clapping in support, others shaking their heads. The divide was visible now, no longer whispers but open stances. Across town, Harold woke to a different reality. He hadn't chosen to lead anything. He had only sat down for a drink, but now his name was in headlines, his face quietly shared on phones, his silence mistaken for leadership. At the church pantry that morning, people approached him not with groceries, but with questions. "Mr. Whitfield, will you be at the march?" a teenager asked, eyes wide with expectation. Harold shook his head slowly. "I don't march. I stand where I am." But word spread anyway. Harold Whitfield, the veteran from the video, would be there. People assumed. People projected. His presence had become symbolic, whether he wanted it or not. By mid-morning, the town square looked different. Flyers taped to lampposts read, Justice at Millie's place. Across the street, counter flyers appeared. Support our own. Don't let outsiders tell us who we are. Coffee shops buzzed with arguments. Old friendships strained. Inside Ray's barbershop, voices rose above the buzz of clippers. I've known Sherry since she was a kid, one man said. She didn't mean nothing by it. Another customer shot back. Didn't mean nothing? That glass was filthy. That laugh wasn't a joke. You wouldn't put up with it if it happened to you. You people always think everything is about race. You people. You hear yourself. The barber finally set down his scissors and barked. Enough. My shop's for cuts, not battles. But even he couldn't erase the line now etched between his customers. In the grocery store, whispers followed Harold down the aisle. Some nodded in quiet respect. Others turned away sharply. A woman he had known for years passed him at the dairy section, her smile brittle. Harold, she said tightly, you could have let it go. This town doesn't need outsiders stirring trouble. Outsiders didn't hand me that glass, Harold replied evenly. Her mouth opened, then closed. She turned and walked off without another word. At home, Harold found Dana waiting on his porch, her phone clutched in her hand. You've seen this? She asked, her voice edged with concern. He took the phone. A new Facebook group had popped up overnight. Stand with Sherry. Members were sharing pictures of Sherry, with captions like, good girl, wrong place, wrong time, and don't let cancel culture destroy Millie's place. Some posts went further, hinting that Harold was being used by activists to make the town look racist. They're making you the enemy, Dana said quietly. Not the diner. Not her. You. Harold exhaled, rubbing his temples. I didn't ask for this. I know, she said, but they'll keep pushing you into it whether you want it or not. That night, the town split down the middle. In the park, activists gathered with signs and chants, practicing for the morning. Across the street, a crowd of locals waved flags and banners in support of Millie's place. The air hummed with tension, not yet a clash, but one heartbeat away from it. Reporters filmed it all, their cameras hungry for conflict. Interviews aired on the local news. She's a good girl, one supporter said. This is just outsiders trying to shame us. She mocked a veteran who served this country. An activist countered. If that's not wrong, what is? By sundown, the division was clear. Millie's place was no longer a diner. It was a fault line. Harold sat at his kitchen table, the blinds drawn, Booker at his feet. His phone buzzed with messages from people he didn't know. Some thanking him for standing strong, others calling him names he hadn't heard since his earliest days in uniform. He scrolled once, then set the phone down, unwilling to feed the noise. Lorna called. They're saying tomorrow's going to be big. Police might get involved. I didn't want this, Harold said quietly. I know. But sometimes you don't choose the moment, Harold. The moment chooses you. He leaned back, the words settling heavy. And if I don't step up, then they'll rewrite what happened until you're the villain, she said firmly. Silence stretched between them, until Harold finally said, I'll think on it. Later, when the town had gone dark, and the streets lay empty, Harold stepped outside to check the mail. The night air was thick, carrying the faint hum of cicadas. Booker padded beside him, sniffing at the porch steps. He opened the mailbox, expecting bills and flyers. Instead, a single folded piece of paper sat inside. No envelope. Just plain white, edges creased from a hurried hand. He unfolded it slowly under the porch light. The words were scrawled in black ink, rushed but deliberate. You should have kept quiet. Harold stared at the note, the handwriting jagged, the message simple but heavy. The porch light flickered once, casting shadows across the yard. Booker growled low, as if sensing the weight of the threat. Harold folded the note back into his hand, the night pressing tighter around him. The anonymous warning lay in his palm. You should have kept quiet. The morning came thick with humidity, the kind that made shirts cling to skin before the sun had even settled above the rooftops. Harold sat on his porch with Booker at his feet, the note from the mailbox folded neatly in his pocket. He hadn't slept much. Each time he closed his eyes, the words burned again. You should have kept quiet. By 9 o'clock, the hum of voices carried through the town. The protest had begun. Harold could hear it before he saw it. The rhythm of chants, the occasional honk of a passing car in support, and the counter-chorus of jeers from the other side of the street. He debated staying home. It wasn't his style to stand in crowds, not anymore. But something inside him refused to sit still. The weight of the note in his pocket was too much to ignore. like a hand pressing him forward. Booker barked once as Harold rose, as if sensing his decision. By the time Harold reached Main Street, Millie's place was no longer just a diner. It was a stage. On one side of the street, protesters stood with hand-painted signs, "Respect our veterans," "End racism at Millie's place," "Justice for Harold." Their chants rose steady, voices threading together with urgency. Among them, Harold recognized Dana, her hair tied back, holding a sign that read simply, "Dignity isn't optional." On the opposite side, counter-protesters gathered under a row of American flags and banners supporting Sherry. Their signs shouted back, "Stand with Sherry. Stop cancel culture. Our town, our rules." The two sides shouted across the narrow street, words ricocheting off the diner's glass windows. News cameras hovered, lenses drinking in the clash. Reporters stood with microphones, narrating the divide as though the town had split clean down the middle. Harold stopped at the edge of the crowd, not stepping in but not stepping back either. He was recognized instantly. Heads turned, chants shifted. A ripple moved through the protesters as they gestured toward him, calling his name. "There he is, Harold," someone shouted. The crowd parted slightly, eyes on him. For a moment, Harold wished he could vanish, slip away before expectation swallowed him. But silence, his old shield, no longer served him here. Dana pushed forward, reaching him first. "You came," she said, her voice low but firm. "I didn't plan to," Harold admitted. "But they left me no choice." Her eyes flicked toward the folded paper peeking from his pocket. "Threats already?" He nodded once. "Anonymous, but clear." "Then you being here matters even more," she said. Across the street, a counter-protester spotted Harold and pointed. "There's the liar, the complainer." The words sparked others. Shouts rose. "Go home, Harold. You're ruining this town. Fraud." Harold stood still, jaw set. The words weren't new. He'd heard their cousins whispered in different decades, in different uniforms, but the volume still pierced. One man stepped out of the counter-protest crowd, cupping his hands to his mouth. "Bet you weren't even a real soldier. Just another one playing victim." The accusation hit harder than expected. It wasn't just about the diner anymore. They were trying to erase his service, his very identity. The protesters shouted back immediately, defending him. He served this country. Show respect. Voices clashed, louder, harder, the air between the two groups thickening like a storm front. Inside Millie's place, the blinds twitched. Sherry peeked out, her face pale as she watched the spectacle her actions had ignited. Carl hovered behind her, sweating, muttering about insurance and damages, his eyes darting between the blinds and the growing number of reporters. "This is out of control," Carl said. "We should have shut down for the day." Sherry shook her head stubbornly. "Closing would look like admitting guilt. We did nothing wrong." Carl stared at her. "You laughed at him, Sherry. On camera." She flinched, but her chin lifted again. "He's making it bigger than it is. They all are." Outside, the chants swelled. A line of cars slowed as drivers leaned on their horns, some in support, some in mockery. Tension snapped in the air, not physical yet but perilously close. Harold stood firm, saying little, his silence interpreted as resolve by those who supported him, and his arrogance by those who opposed. Cameras turned toward him, capturing his every breath, every flicker in his expression. A young protester approached him, eyes shining. "Mr. Whitfield, will you speak? People need to hear from you."
Harold shook his head. "I didn't come to give speeches."
"But you're the reason we're here," the young man pressed. Harold's eyes narrowed. "No, you're here because of what was done, not because of me." Still, he knew the truth. His presence carried weight. His silence spoke louder than 1,000 words. The counter-protesters grew bolder, fueled by the cameras. One man stepped forward, waving a flag on a pole, shouting, "This is America. You don't like it? Leave." His friends cheered behind him. Dana leaned close to Harold. "They want you to break. Don't give them what they want." "I've been holding steady longer than they've been alive," Harold murmured. The chants escalated. "Justice now. Stand with Sherry." Two rhythms colliding, neither side giving ground. Reporters leaned in, microphones extended like fishing rods into the chaos. And then, the sudden wail of sirens. Two police cruisers rolled slowly onto Main Street, lights flashing. Officers stepped out, hands resting casually near their belts, eyes scanning the divided crowd. The noise dipped but did not die. The lead officer, a tall man with mirrored sunglasses, walked straight toward Harold. He didn't address the protesters. He didn't address the counter-protesters. He stopped directly in front of Harold, his shadow long against the pavement. "Mr. Whitfield," the officer said evenly, though his tone carried warning. "If this keeps going, you'll be the one in trouble." For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Both sides froze, stunned. The man who hadn't thrown a word of insult, who hadn't raised a hand, who had only stood silently, was the one being threatened. Harold's jaw tightened, the note in his pocket burning hotter. The crowd erupted again, protesters shouting in outrage, counter-protesters smirking with satisfaction. Cameras zoomed in, hungry for the shot. Harold said nothing, but inside the words roared. The police had warned him, not the crowd, not the ones hurling insults him. The officer's warning still rang in Harold's ears as the chants resumed, louder than before, the crowd refusing to shrink under flashing blue lights. He had said nothing, stood still, steady, but already he had been marked as the problem. Cameras caught it all. Reporters leaned forward with the eagerness of people who knew they were witnessing the kind of moment that carried headlines beyond county lines. By evening, Main Street looked like something out of a broadcast reel, rather than a quiet town. Satellite trucks lined the curbs. Microphones sprouted like weeds along the sidewalks. Camera crews jostled for position, light rigs brightening the diner's worn sign as if it were a marquee on a stage. Anchors spoke in measured voices, the drama packaged for living rooms across America. A black veteran at the center of a small-town controversy. The diner accused of mocking one of its own residents. A nation asking how a man who served his country could be disrespected in his own hometown. For Harold, the world felt suddenly smaller and larger all at once. At his kitchen table, the hum of his old radio was drowned by the flicker of the television. Every channel seemed to carry his name, his face, the story of a dirty glass that had become a mirror for something far bigger. Booker rested his head on Harold's knee, sensing his unease. Dana had stopped by earlier with groceries, urging him to keep the blinds drawn. "They're camped outside the diner, but don't be surprised if they come here," she had warned. "You're the story now, Harold, whether you want to be or not." And she was right. The next morning, a reporter knocked on his door, polite but insistent, microphone in hand. "Mr. Whitfield, could you give us a statement? The country wants to hear your side." Harold shook his head, voice firm. "I don't have a side. I asked for a glass of water." The reporter hesitated, then leaned forward. "But people see you as a symbol." "I'm a man," Harold interrupted. "Not a symbol, not a headline." He closed the door, but the camera stayed, lenses staring at his house as though waiting for a confession. Meanwhile, at Millie's place, Carl tried to keep the business afloat under the glare of the media. The diner's booths filled not with regulars but with strangers, curiosity seekers, YouTubers, streaming live, outsiders who wanted to taste controversy, along with their eggs. Carl plastered on a smile, muttering business is business even as tension grew. Sherry, however, shrank from the spotlight. She kept to the kitchen, claiming headaches, avoiding the dining floor. Her laughter, once loud and careless, had been replaced with whispers and hurried glances at her phone. Each notification seemed to tighten her chest. Each new headline another stone on her shoulders. She tried once, nervously, to speak to a local reporter outside. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, words tumbling. "I was just trying to lighten the mood. People are making me into something I'm not." But within hours, that clip was circulating online. Commenters dissected every twitch of her mouth, every blink of her eyes. "She's not sorry," they wrote. "She's sorry she got caught." By the third day, national anchors debated her intentions on morning shows. Psychologists weighed in. Former waitresses called in with stories. And over it all hovered one unshakable question. Why is a man who fought for his country treated like this in his own hometown? In the barbershop, conversations turned raw. "We can't let them drag this town through the mud," one man insisted. Another countered, "The mud was already here. We just didn't want to see it." At the church, Lorna gathered volunteers around Harold, shielding him when reporters lingered too close. "Let the man breathe," she snapped more than once. But Harold could feel the walls closing in. His quiet life was gone, dismantled not by his choice but by a laugh that refused to fade. One evening, Dana convinced him to watch a primetime broadcast. On the screen, a panel of commentators debated the incident, as if it were a chess match. One said, "This is about respect for veterans." Another countered, "No, this is about racial double standards." A third chimed in, "It's both. That's why it resonates." Harold muted the volume. "They're all talking about me, but not one has asked me what I feel." Dana studied him. "Then maybe you should tell them." "I've told them all I have to tell," Harold replied. But even as he said it, he knew silence was being twisted into storylines he couldn't control. That night, as he lay awake, the siren call of his phone lit up the room. Another notification, another headline, but this time something new.
Breaking: Millie's Place flagged in state records, health code violations under investigation.
Harold sat up, eyes narrowing. He clicked the link. The article detailed a list of complaints filed over the years. Grease traps not cleaned, food stored improperly, expired meat served. Most had been brushed aside as minor infractions, but now, under the spotlight of scandal, inspectors were circling back. The article ended with a single line that made Harold's stomach turn. Sources suggest investigators may have evidence that customers of color were routinely served leftovers and poorer quality food than white patrons. Booker stirred at the sound of Harold's sharp inhale. He reached down, steadying himself with the dog's warmth. The dirty glass, the laugh, the lies. Suddenly, they weren't isolated acts. They were part of something deeper, uglier, a truth that had been hiding in plain sight. And now the nation wasn't just asking about Sherry. They were asking about the diner itself. The breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Millie's Place was officially under investigation for health code violations. The morning after the breaking news alert, Main Street was hushed in a way Harold hadn't heard in weeks. The chants were gone. The counter-protest flags had disappeared. And even the reporters stood quieter than usual. But it wasn't calm. It was the silence of a storm turning inward. People waiting to see what would be uncovered. Health inspectors arrived in 2 vans, their presence as stark as a spotlight. They marched through the doors of Millie's Place with clipboards in hand, the diner's neon sign flickering weakly above them. Carl tried to greet them with a forced smile, but his palms were slick with sweat, his shirt sticking to his back. "Routine check," one inspector said curtly, though everyone knew it wasn't. Reporters crowded the windows as the inspectors disappeared into the kitchen. At first there was nothing but the sound of pans clattering and drawers opening. But then came the looks, the raised brows, the grim nods between inspectors, the way they scribbled notes faster with each discovery. Hours later, when they finally emerged, their faces told the story. Pale, disgusted, weary, one of them whispered to another, not quietly enough, "Filthy." The news spread instantly. Word of expired meat found in the freezer, grease caked so thick it had hardened like wax, mold creeping along the walls where tiles had cracked. It wasn't just neglect, it was years of shortcuts piled into a mountain too high to ignore. But what hit harder was the rumor that followed. Inspectors had found notes taped inside a cabinet. Crude shorthand that suggested certain customers weren't served the same as others. Special lists, one inspector muttered to a reporter. The phrase was repeated until it became a headline. That night, the first former employee spoke out. A young woman named Tasha, who had worked at Millie's Place as a dishwasher in high school, went live on her social media page. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she spoke. "I never wanted to say anything before, because who'd believe a kid? But yeah, it's true, they'd tell us to put certain plates in a separate stack, the ones for those customers. They didn't say it outright, but we knew what it meant. If you were black or brown, you weren't getting the same as everyone else. Leftovers, old bread, burnt fries." Her video spread like wildfire. More former employees joined in. Some anonymous, some brave enough to show their faces. A former server admitted, "I was told to keep certain customers waiting longer, so regulars wouldn't complain about who was being served first. I hated it, but I needed the paycheck." The narrative shifted again. It wasn't just Sherry's laugh, or one dirty glass. It was a system, a quiet cruelty, embedded in routine. At the church pantry, Harold listened as volunteers whispered over the latest revelations. "They've been feeding us scraps for years, and we didn't even know." "You can't tell me Millie would have allowed that. She wasn't like that." Maybe she wasn't, but things changed after she was gone. Lorna placed a steady hand on Harold's arm. "This isn't just about you anymore. You lit a fire under something people wanted to keep buried." Harold shook his head slowly. "I didn't light it. They did, every time they thought dignity could be rationed out." Meanwhile, Sherry sat in the back of the diner, scrolling through her phone in disbelief. Each new confession hit her harder than the last. This isn't fair, she muttered to herself. They're just making things up now. But Carl, pale and exhausted, slammed his fist on the desk. Don't you get it? This isn't about fairness anymore. This is evidence. Do you know what it means if they prove discrimination was happening here? Lawsuits, fines, we won't survive it. Sherry's lips curled stubbornly. So what? They can't pin it all on me. Carl glared at her. They don't have to. You gave them a face. At that night, the diner's parking lot was deserted, but the glow of phones lit the darkness. Strangers sat in cars, scrolling through updates. Former customers drove by slowly, staring at the building as though it had betrayed them personally. Inside his home, Harold sat by the window, Booker at his side, the shadows long across the room. He wasn't surprised by the inspector's findings. Not really. He had felt it in the small ways for years. The lukewarm food, the dismissive glances, the tiny humiliations that never quite made a headline. Now it was all spilling into the light. The phone rang. It was Dana, her voice urgent. Turn on the news. Right now. Harold clicked on the TV. A man's face filled the screen. Not Sherry's. Not Carl's. It was someone older, weary, his apron stained with years of grease. The caption below read, "Former cook at Millie's place speaks out." The man's voice cracked but held steady. I worked that kitchen for 15 years. We were told plain as day to serve leftovers to certain people, to keep the good cuts of meat for the regulars, to scrape plates back onto fresh ones when we could get away with it. I hated it. But if I said no, I'd be out of a job, and I had a family to feed. The reporter leaned in. Certain people. Who do you mean? The cook looked straight at the camera. Black customers. That's who. Harold's chest tightened. Booker lifted his head at the sharp exhale. Harold didn't realize he'd let out. The cook continued, his eyes heavy with shame. I should have spoken up sooner, but I didn't, and now it's too late to undo what was done. The screen cut to the reporter summarizing, but Harold barely heard the words. The weight of the confession filled the room, thick and suffocating. Outside, a car drove slowly past Harold's house, headlights sweeping across his window before disappearing into the night. He felt the note in his pocket again. You should have kept quiet. Only now, the truth wasn't just his burden. The whole town had to face it. The former cook's confession echoed across the nation. We were told to serve leftovers to certain people. The cook's confession had shifted everything. No longer could people claim Harold's experience was exaggerated. No longer could Millie's place brush it off as just a joke. The rot was visible now, documented, undeniable. But with the diner under fire, attention turned elsewhere. Reporters began to ask, who exactly was Harold Whitfield? At first the questions were surface level. His age, where he lived, what he did for work. But soon, the cameras widened their scope, digging into his past. His name, typed into search bars, unearthed fragments of history buried in military records, old news clippings, even a few commendations archived online. Within days, Harold's face wasn't just paired with Millie's place. It was side by side with photos of soldiers in desert fatigues, dust swirling behind them, rifles in hand. One news anchor's voice carried the story. Staff Sergeant Harold Whitfield served 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. He received commendations for bravery after pulling fellow soldiers from a burning Humvee under fire. He was honorably discharged after more than a decade of service. The revelation hit the nation harder than any protest chant. Viewers, already outraged by his treatment at the diner, now had context. The man mocked with a dirty glass of water had once risked his life for the very freedoms his neighbors took for granted. But back in town, the reaction wasn't simple. At the barber shop, one customer shook his head as the anchor spoke. I had no idea he went through all that, he muttered. Another shrugged, defensive. Doesn't change what happened. A glass of water is a glass of water. Folks act like he stormed Normandy. The barber, finally losing patience, snapped. He put his life on the line, so you could sit here arguing about it. Show some respect. Meanwhile, Harold sat at home, remote in hand, watching pieces of his life being reassembled by strangers. His service was no secret, but it wasn't something he advertised. To him, the medals and commendations tucked away in a shoebox in his closet were reminders of survival, not trophies. He had carried brothers back under fire, written letters to families that still haunted him, lived through nights when silence was interrupted by mortars. Now the world wanted to make him a symbol again. Dana stopped by with groceries, her face lit with cautious pride. "They're finally seeing you for who you are," she said. Harold shook his head. "They're seeing what they want. A story they can hold up like a banner, not me." "Harold, don't you see? This changes everything. They can't dismiss you now." He met her eyes, steady but weary. "They shouldn't need medals to believe a man deserves respect." Her silence was heavy, full of truth she couldn't argue. By the next day, the coverage intensified. National outlets dug deeper, unearthing interviews Harold had given years ago to military newsletters, quotes about leadership, about duty, about holding steady under fire. One article resurfaced about the day in Afghanistan, when Harold's convoy had been ambushed, a Humvee overturned, flames trapping soldiers inside. Witnesses recalled how Harold had rushed in despite the gunfire, pulling 2 men out, one screaming, the other unconscious. He had dragged them both behind cover, returning to the flames until his uniform singed. The story spread like wildfire online. Veterans groups reposted it with captions like, "This is who they mocked." Strangers sent messages of gratitude, calling him a hero, thanking him for his service. But Harold didn't feel heroic. He remembered not the applause but the weight of the men he carried, the silence of those he couldn't. The medals in his shoebox weren't victories. They were reminders of lives interrupted. As the praise mounted, so did the scrutiny. Some corners of the internet pushed back, echoing the diner's defenders. If he was such a hero, why isn't he doing more with his life now? Funny how his past is suddenly convenient when people want to make a point. Being a soldier doesn't mean you can't be a liar. The comments stung more than Harold wanted to admit. It was one thing to be mocked in silence at a diner. It was another to have his very service questioned by people who had never left the safety of their living rooms. One night, unable to sleep, Harold opened the shoebox at the back of his closet. Inside were medals dulled with time, commendations on official paper, photographs yellowing at the edges. He lifted one, a bronze star, and stared at the engraving. His reflection wavered in its shine, blurred by the dim light. He whispered to the quiet room, "What does it take to be enough?" Booker shifted at his feet, a low whine filling the silence. The next morning, Harold woke to something unexpected. A reporter on the news said, "We tracked down one of Harold Whitfield's former commanders, retired Colonel James Rourke, and he had this to say." The screen cut to an older man in a crisp suit, his silver hair cropped close, his voice firm. "Staff Sergeant Whitfield was one of the finest soldiers under my command. Brave, steady, selfless. If anyone doubts his character, let them doubt me too. I'll stand by Harold Whitfield any day, in any place, against any accusation." The words carried a weight that silenced even the most cynical commentators. Harold froze, staring at the screen. Colonel Rourke hadn't spoken to him in years, yet here he was, defending him with the same authority he once commanded on the battlefield. Dana called immediately, her voice breathless. "Did you see? He's standing up for you, Harold. Publicly. This isn't just your fight anymore." Harold sat back slowly, the shoebox still open beside him, the metal glinting faintly in the morning light. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders lifted slightly, the weight shifting. He was no longer alone. A TV reporter had found Harold's old commander, Colonel Rourke, who vowed to stand by him publicly. Carl hadn't slept in days. The shadows under his eyes made him look older than his 53 years, and his hands trembled every time he gripped his coffee mug. The diner, once the steady anchor of his life, was now a sinking ship, and he was the captain expected to steer it through a storm he hadn't seen coming. The inspector's report had gutted Millie's place. The cook's confession had stripped away whatever goodwill remained. And now Colonel Rourke's televised defense of Harold had tilted public sympathy entirely against them. Carl knew he had to act. Doing nothing meant certain ruin. By midweek, he made his decision. He would hold a press conference. He rehearsed his words in the back office, pacing between the filing cabinet and the faded photo of Millie on the wall. "We're a family diner," he muttered to himself. "We've been serving this community for 40 years. Sherry's actions were taken out of context. Harold Whitfield is respected, but this has been blown out of proportion." He repeated the lines until they felt like armor. Then he stepped out into the light. The press conference took place in front of the diner, its chipped red bricks serving as a backdrop for the swarm of cameras and microphones. The crowd was thick, Reporters, protesters, counter-protesters, locals and strangers alike. Sherry lingered inside, peering nervously from behind the blinds, her face pale and strained. Carl cleared his throat, gripping the podium he'd borrowed from the town hall. His voice cracked at first, but he steadied it. Millie's Place has always been about community, he began. For 40 years we've opened our doors to anyone who wanted a hot meal and a kind word. What happened here last week has been exaggerated, twisted by social media into something it was never meant to be. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The reporters leaned forward. Sherry Lawson did not mean harm. She did not intend to disrespect anyone. A dirty glass and an ill-timed laugh should not define this diner, or this town. We are better than that. The murmurs grew louder, angry now, some scoffing, some booing. Carl pressed on, his face flushing. We cannot let cancel culture destroy a local business that has fed generations. Millie's Place is not a symbol of hate. It is a place of family, tradition, and hard work. I ask this town, and this country to remember that before rushing to judgment. He stepped back, chest heaving, sweat beading at his temples. He had expected applause, or at least understanding. Instead, he was met with a roar of outrage. You call that an apology? Someone shouted. Exaggerated. We saw the video, another yelled. Signs waved in the air. Justice for Harold. Respect our veterans. Shut down Millie's Place. Even some of the counter-protesters looked uneasy. Carl's words landing poorly even among his defenders. One reporter raised her hand sharply. Mr. Carlson, what about the inspector's findings? Mold, expired food, notes about certain customers being served differently. Are those exaggerations too? Carl's face reddened. Those findings are being misinterpreted. Every restaurant has violations. The reporter cut him off. Serving leftovers to black customers isn't a violation. It's discrimination. Do you deny it? Carl froze, stammering. I deny that it was ever policy. Whatever an employee may have claimed, it was not condoned by me. But his words fell flat. Another reporter pressed forward. And what about Harold Whitfield's military record? Do you deny disrespecting a decorated veteran? Carl's mouth opened, but no sound came. Cameras zoomed in, catching the sweat glistening on his brow, the flicker of panic in his eyes. The crowd erupted again, chants rising. Shut it down. Shut it down. From the diner window. Sherry's face appeared pale and stricken. For the first time, she looked as though she understood the magnitude of what had been unleashed. Carl raised his hands, desperate. Please, we never meant to hurt anyone. This has gone too far. But he was cut off by movement, at the edge of the crowd. A woman stepped forward, tall and composed, her dark suit crisp against the summer heat. She carried a leather briefcase, and the moment the microphone swung toward her, the crowd quieted. My name is Marissa Cole, she announced, her voice steady and clear. I am a civil rights attorney, and I represent Staff Sergeant Harold Whitfield. A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. Cameras swiveled, reporters shouted questions, and Carl staggered back from the podium as if struck. Marissa continued, her gaze sweeping the crowd. Today we are filing a lawsuit against Millie's Place for racial discrimination, public humiliation, and violation of Harold Whitfield's civil rights. This is not cancel culture. This is accountability, and accountability is long overdue. The protesters erupted in cheers. The counter-protesters shouted back, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of approval. Carl gripped the podium, his knuckles white, his face drained of color. Sherry disappeared from the window, her shadow retreating into the dark. Harold, watching from his porch a block away, felt the weight of silence lift just slightly. For the first time since the dirty glass had been set before him, he wasn't standing alone. The crowd hushed, stunned, as Harold's lawyer announced, a lawsuit was being filed against Millie's Place. The press conference had ended in disaster, Carl nearly collapsing under the weight of his own words, and the lawyer's announcement landing like a thunderclap across the crowd. By nightfall, Millie's Place was trending nationwide. The lawsuit was already making headlines, and legal analysts on late-night shows were dissecting its potential impact. Inside the diner, the tension snapped. Carl called Sherry into the office, his face pale, his voice brittle. It's over, Sherry. You're fired. Sherry's jaw dropped. What? You're blaming me for all of this? Carl rubbed his forehead, sweat slicking his hairline. It started with you. It won't end with you, but I have to show the public we're taking action. You're out. Sherry's face twisted, rage breaking through the thin mask of fear. So I'm the scapegoat? After everything I've done for this place? After the years I've worked doubles while you sat in here counting receipts? Sherry, Carl said quietly, almost pleading. You laughed at him. On camera. I can't save you from that. Her voice rose, sharp and shrill. It was a joke. And now my life is ruined because some old man wanted to play victim? You think I'm just gonna roll over and take the blame? No. If I'm going down, I'm not going alone. She stormed out of the office, her footsteps echoing through the empty diner. For the first time in years, Millie's place felt like a coffin. The next morning, Sherry appeared on a local talk show. Her hair was done, makeup carefully applied, but her eyes carried the wild gleam of someone cornered. She sat stiffly in the chair, gripping the armrests, as though holding herself steady. The host began gently, asking how she was coping. I'll tell you how I'm coping, Sherry snapped. I've been humiliated, dragged through the mud, called a racist for something that wasn't racist at all. My face is everywhere. My name is being spit on. And for what? A dirty glass of water? One laugh? You people act like I committed a crime. The host shifted uneasily, but some have pointed out this wasn't an isolated incident. Several former customers and employees. Sherry cut him off. Lies. All of it. These people are jumping on the bandwagon because it's easy. It's Harold Whitfield's word against mine, and everyone decided his word is gospel. You want the truth? He ruined my life, not the other way around. The clip aired within the hour and exploded online. Screenshots of Sherry, her face twisted with anger, her words sharp as knives, spread across every platform. She trended again, but not for sympathy. He ruined my life. Those 4 words became the headline, the meme, the proof that Sherry wasn't sorry. She had no remorse, only resentment. The backlash was swift and merciless. Comment sections filled with outrage. This isn't about her life. This is about dignity. Imagine thinking losing your job is worse than mocking a veteran. Sherry just admitted she doesn't see him as human, only as a problem for her. But the blow that cut deepest was the way her face, frozen in mid-rant, became a symbol. Protest signs, social media posts, even editorial cartoons began using her image as shorthand for casual racism. Unmasked. The smirk from the original video had been damning. Now the anger from her interview sealed her reputation. Back in her apartment, Sherry hurled her phone across the couch, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to scream, to make the world hear her side. I'm not a monster, she cried into the empty room. I'm not. But the walls didn't answer. The silence was heavier than the noise outside. Her mother called again, her voice weary and strained. Sherry, you need to stop talking to reporters. Every time you open your mouth, it gets worse. So what, I'm supposed to just sit here and let everyone think I'm some kind of racist villain? You don't understand, her mother said softly. They already do. And every word you speak confirms it. Sherry hung up, pressing her palms to her temples. She couldn't reconcile the image of herself as the hard-working waitress everyone once knew with the monster she now saw reflected back in headlines. The gap between the two felt like a chasm she could never cross. Meanwhile, Harold watched the interview from his living room. Dana sat beside him, arms crossed, fury written across her face. She still doesn't get it, Dana muttered. She's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry she got caught. Harold said nothing. He just stared at the screen, watching Sherry's face twist, hearing the words replay in his head. He ruined my life. For him, the irony was sharp. She had reduced years of his quiet endurance, years of surviving small humiliations, dismissals and lies to a single accusation, ruining her life. He turned off the television. Her life isn't ruined, he said softly. She just doesn't know what real ruin looks like. Dana looked at him carefully. You do. He nodded, eyes distant. I've seen it in places she can't imagine. That night, the town felt on edge. The lawsuit announcement still rippled through conversations. Sherry's interview stoked anger, like kindling. Millie's place sat dark, its neon sign flickering weakly, the once lively parking lot empty. But the silence didn't last. Near midnight, headlights cut across the lot, a car slowed to a crawl, its engine humming low. Then in a flash, figures leapt out, faces hidden, movements quick. The crash of shattering glass tore through the night, windows splintered, shards raining down onto the diner floor. Another crash followed, then another. The building that had stood for 40 years groaned under the violence of its fall. By the time neighbors peeked through curtains, the car was gone, tires screeching into the distance. The diner's front windows were gaping wounds, jagged edges glinting in the dark. The sound carried through the quiet streets, reaching Harold's house. He sat up in bed, Booker barking at the noise, his chest tightening with the knowledge of what it meant. The town had crossed another line. That night, the diner's front windows were smashed. Millie's place left bleeding glass into the street. The shattered windows of Millie's place glittered on the sidewalk like ice after a storm. By sunrise, the sight had already drawn a crowd. Neighbors stood in small knots, whispering, some shaking their heads in dismay, others muttering that the diner had brought it on itself. Carl arrived pale and exhausted, staring at the destruction as if he were looking at a body. He ran his hand along the broken frame of the door, fingertips catching on jagged glass. The diner, his livelihood, his inheritance of Millie's dream, looked violated and hollow. But the damage outside wasn't what sealed Millie's place's fate. It was what health officials found inside that morning. Inspectors, called back after the vandalism, moved through the kitchen with sharper eyes than before. They opened coolers and found chicken thawing at unsafe temperatures. They checked shelves and discovered bread with mold tucked behind fresher loaves. In one container marked with tape that read "Serve First," they found food nearly 2 weeks old. One inspector pulled Carl aside, her tone clipped. "This isn't neglect. This is endangerment. You've been serving people food that should have been thrown away days ago." Carl stammered, sweat dampening his collar. We're a small operation. Sometimes things slip through the cracks." She didn't soften. "These aren't cracks. These are practices. And with the testimony we've already collected from former employees, this isn't just a health violation. It's a civil rights issue." The words landed like stones in Carl's chest. Civil rights issue. That meant the stain wasn't just about food. It was about morality. By noon, officials taped a notice on the glass door, its bold black letters visible from across the street. "Closed health code violations. Do not enter." The sign drew cameras like flies. Reporters filmed segments in front of it, their voices somber, their hands gesturing to the boarded windows and the silence inside. Millie's place, once a cornerstone of this community, now stands closed under permanent order. Health inspectors discovered a pattern of dangerous food practices, including evidence that customers of color were routinely given leftovers. The diner that symbolized comfort food and tradition now symbolizes something far darker. Inside his home, Harold watched the coverage with mixed feelings. Booker lay at his feet, tail thumping lazily against the floorboards, oblivious to the magnitude of what was unraveling. Dana sat beside Harold on the couch, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It's over," she whispered. Harold didn't respond right away. He was thinking about Millie, the real Millie, whom he remembered from years ago. She had once served him pie after church service, refusing payment when she knew money was tight. He wondered what she would think of what her diner had become. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Nothing's ever really over. Building's close. But the rot, it stays in people, unless they want it gone." Dana studied him carefully. "You're not celebrating." "What is there to celebrate?" Harold asked. "They didn't close it because of the laugh. They didn't close it because of dignity. They closed it because of mold and old bread. The truth got buried under violations. People will walk past it and say, 'That place failed health inspection,' not, 'That place failed humanity.'" His words lingered heavy in the room. At the diner, Carl stood helpless as officials carried out boxes of records. He wanted to shout, to argue, to salvage some piece of pride, but the words died in his throat. Sherry hadn't returned since her firing. Staff stopped answering his calls. The diner, once bustling with clatter and chatter, stood hollow. The smell of grease replaced with the cold sterility of bleach left behind by inspectors. A group of locals gathered across the street, staring at the sign taped to the door. Some looked satisfied, others looked lost. An older man muttered, "Where am I supposed to get my coffee now?" Another replied, "It ain't about coffee anymore." That night, the diner stood in silence. The neon sign buzzed weakly, but no longer glowed, its tube burned out from neglect. The parking lot was empty, save for shards of glass swept into piles. Millie's place, once a place of laughter, warmth, and routine, looked like a ghost. Harold walked by after dusk, Booker's leash in his hand, his footsteps slow against the pavement. He stopped at the edge of the lot, staring at the locked doors, the taped notice fluttering slightly in the breeze. Memories pressed against him. The smell of bacon, the clink of coffee cups, Millie's smile, all gone now, replaced by silence. But something new caught his eye. On the door, just beneath the health notice, someone had taped another sheet of paper, white, clean, handwritten in bold black marker. Harold stepped closer, heart tightening as he read the words, "For Harold." The note was simple, but its weight was immense. It wasn't signed. He didn't know who had written it, who had taped it there, or what exactly they meant. But the message was clear. The shutdown wasn't just about mold, or old bread, or expired meat. For at least one person, it was about him, about justice. Booker tugged at the leash, but Harold stood rooted to the spot, the wind rattling the paper softly. Behind him, a car slowed as it passed, headlights lingering on his back before sliding away into the night. Harold folded the moment into his memory, knowing the battle wasn't finished, only transformed. On the locked doors of Millie's place, a note fluttered in the breeze, 4 words written in black marker, "For Harold." The diner stood silent now, its windows boarded, its neon sign dead, its parking lot an empty stretch of cracked asphalt. For weeks, Millie's place had been the center of noise, division, shouting, and cameras. Now it was a shell, abandoned, but never unnoticed. People slowed as they passed, staring at the taped notices and the jagged gaps where glass once gleamed. The town itself felt different, quieter, but heavy. Conversations shifted in barbershops, on church steps, in grocery aisles, where there had once been quick dismissals, just a joke, overreaction. There was now hesitation. People carried the weight of the health reports, the cook's confession, the sign taped to the door, "For Harold." But not everyone was willing to change. At the corner store, Harold overheard 2 men muttering by the coffee machine. Whole place didn't have to shut down over some glass of water. One grumbled. The other shook his head. It wasn't just water. You read the report. Report or not, the first snapped. They turned this town into a circus. Outsiders came in, called us all racists. That man Whitfield, he let it happen. Harold said nothing, only paid for his milk and left. But the words clung to him. Later that day he walked past the library, where an older woman approached him cautiously. Her face was lined, her hair white, her eyes full of something he hadn't seen in weeks, remorse.
Mr. Whitfield.
She said softly, "I need to tell you, I'm sorry. I saw that video and I wanted to believe it wasn't what it looked like. I wanted to defend the diner because I've eaten there since I was a girl. But I can't defend cruelty. Not anymore." Harold nodded, his voice steady but quiet. "It takes more strength to admit truth than to deny it. Thank you." Not everyone offered apologies, but some did. A young cashier at the grocery store slipped him a note with his receipt. "Thank you for standing tall." A father at the crosswalk where Harold sometimes worked paused his car, rolled down his window, and said, "My son asked why people were mean to you. I told him because the world isn't fair, but I also told him you showed us how to stand with dignity. He wants to be like you." The words humbled Harold, but they also unsettled him. He hadn't wanted to be anyone's lesson. He hadn't chosen to be anyone's symbol. Dana noticed the heaviness in him, one evening as they sat on his porch. "You carry all of it, don't you? The hate and the thanks." Harold sipped his tea, eyes on the quiet street. "Both weigh the same. Both remind me it'll never leave me alone." But she leaned forward, her voice firm. "Maybe it's not supposed to leave you alone. Maybe this town needed you to hold that mirror up, whether you wanted to or not." He didn't answer. The silence between them said enough. In other corners of town, bitterness festered. A Facebook group, Save Millie's Place, still churned out angry posts. Members blamed Harold for the diner's closure, accused the inspectors of corruption, claimed the lawsuit was a scam. The group shrank each week, but its loudest voices grew harsher. "They took our diner," one man wrote. "They'll take more if we let them." Another replied, "Not if we remind them whose town this is." The words had an edge, Harold recognized, the same edge that had delivered a note into his mailbox weeks before. Meanwhile, activists from outside the town began leaving. The cameras thinned, reporters packed their vans. The story that had consumed the nation was fading from headlines, moving on to the next scandal. But for the people of the town, the aftermath lingered. One Sunday morning, Harold returned to the church pantry. Volunteers greeted him warmly, clapping his shoulder, offering smiles. Lorna, ever watchful, pulled him aside. "You see how people look at you now?" she said, some with respect, some with anger, but none with indifference. "You forced them to see." Harold's eyes fell to the floor. "I didn't want to force anything. Life doesn't wait for what we want," she replied. "It waits for truth, and truth doesn't whisper. It breaks glass when it needs to." Her words settled over him like a weight he couldn't put down. He slowed, his steps heavy, and stopped in front of the door. The taped health notice was faded now, curling at the edges. The handwritten note, for Harold, was gone, ripped away by wind or hands he'd never know. But something new filled the space. On the side wall of the diner facing the street, fresh paint stretched across the bricks, colors bold, shapes rising, a mural still in progress. Harold's breath caught as he realized what it was. His own face, stern but steady, emerged in careful strokes of paint. Around it the words formed in thick black letters. "Dignity isn't optional." Two young artists stood on ladders, brushes in hand, while a small group of townspeople watched quietly. Some nodded with approval, others frowned in dismay. Harold stood frozen, Booker at his side, as one of the artists glanced down and saw him. The young man paused, then lifted his brush in silent acknowledgement. The crowd turned, whispers spread. Harold's presence pulled all eyes, but he said nothing. He only stared at the mural, the reflection of a man he wasn't sure he recognized. For the first time, the town wasn't looking at Millie's place. They were looking at him. Harold stood before the shuttered diner, staring at the mural being painted in his honor, his own face towering over the bricks where a smirk once lived. The mural on Millie's place drew more visitors than the diner ever had. People drove from nearby towns to see it, some taking photos, some shaking their heads in disapproval. To Harold, it felt strange, standing in front of paint that claimed to capture his dignity, when all he wanted was to live quietly. Weeks passed. The cameras left. The activists moved on. Sherry vanished from public view, though whispers said she was staying with family 2 counties over. Carl put the building up for sale, but buyers were wary. Millie's place lingered, boarded up, a monument to its own undoing. Life in the town began to settle, though settle did not mean heal. The town was split still, some offering Harold nods of respect when he passed, others glaring as if his presence reminded them of a wound they wanted forgotten. The line remained invisible, but it was there, drawn sharp in every glance and silence. Harold didn't seek reconciliation. He sought normalcy, small rituals, quiet days. He walked Booker each morning. He waved at the children, at the crosswalk. He volunteered at the pantry. Slowly, his life returned to the steady rhythm he had known before the glass, before the laugh, and yet nothing was the same. One cool morning, Dana persuaded him to meet her at a new cafe on the edge of town. It had sprung up quickly in the aftermath, filling the void Millie's place left behind. Its walls were fresh painted, its decor modern, its staff young and eager. The menu was written in neat chalk letters. Harold hesitated at the door, Booker sitting patiently at his side. The cafe was bright, filled with soft chatter and the smell of roasted coffee beans. He and Dana slid into a booth near the window, sunlight spilling across the table. A waitress approached, young, nervous, but polite, her apron clean. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Harold glanced at Dana, then back at the waitress. His voice was quiet but firm. "Water, please." She nodded, returning minutes later with 2 tall glasses. The water inside was clear, cold, beads of condensation sliding down the sides. She set them on the table gently. No smirk, no laugh, no hesitation. Harold wrapped his hand around the glass, studying it as though it carried the weight of everything that had happened. He lifted it slowly, took a sip, and set it back down. For the first time in weeks, the taste was clean. Dana watched him carefully. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Harold nodded. Not the water, the moment. He sat in silence, staring out the window at the quiet street. In his mind, the journey replayed. The dirty glass, the laugh, the whispers online, the protests, the police warning him, the lawsuits, the shattered windows, the mural. A single cruel gesture had cracked open, something buried so deep in his town that many still refused to see it. "I keep asking myself," Harold said softly, "what if I'd spoken up that first second? What if I'd pushed the glass back and demanded respect? Would it have changed anything? Or would it have all been buried again?" Dana leaned closer. It was gonna come out sooner or later. You just happened to be the spark. You didn't ask for it. But sometimes history doesn't wait for who volunteers. Harold's eyes lingered on the condensation, sliding down the glass. One glass of water. That's all it took to show people who they are. She reached across the table, resting her hand briefly on his. And to show them who you are. The words sat heavy, but not unbearable. Around them the cafe buzzed with ordinary life. Laughter, plates clinking, the hiss of an espresso machine. No cameras, no chants, no signs, just a small corner of the world carrying on. Harold exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle. For the first time since the storm began, he allowed himself to believe in something close to peace. As he prepared to leave, the waitress returned with the check. She hesitated, then looked at him directly. "Mr. Whitfield," she said softly, "I know you didn't come here for this, but thank you for standing through it. Some of us needed to see it." Harold gave a small nod, tipping his cap. Stand long enough, and people eventually see. He and Dana stepped outside, the sunlight warm on their backs, Booker trotting ahead. The air felt lighter, though Harold knew the shadows hadn't vanished, only shifted. The town had been forced to look at itself, and what it saw couldn't be undone. Some would heal, some would deny, but none could return to the comfort of pretending. As they reached the corner, Harold paused, turning back to glance through the cafe window. The clear glass of water still sat on the table, catching the sunlight. For a long moment he stared at it, remembering the chipped rim, the smudge of lipstick, the smirk, the laugh. The two images overlapped in his mind, one glass dirty, one glass clean. And then he whispered, not to Dana, not to Booker, but to anyone who might carry the story forward. "What would you have done if it were set in front of you?" The question lingered in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. The story closed where it began, with a glass of water. Only this time, the reflection in its surface asked not what Harold had done, but what others would have done. No one should have to beg to be seen as equal. No child should have their brilliance doubted, and no life should be measured by prejudice. If this story moved you, let your voice be heard. Type yes if you believe in justice, and subscribe if you know silence is no longer an option.